Okay, yeah, welcome to the second episode of this tutorial. By the end of this tutorial, we'll be able to switch on the light and switch it off again, just like that. Okay, so let's get started. By the end of the last tutorial, we ended up with a base map. Yours might look a little bit different, but that doesn't matter. What I'm going to start to do is just to highlight these layers that I've already styled, right click on it and say group selected and call it a base map. Because I don't want to touch these layers at this stage, I'm just going to go below and switch it off. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add my building footprints again. So I'm just going to drag my geo package in here and choose building footprint. Yes, you can duplicate the layer as well, but then you will have to change the styles that's already been applied to it. So I just found it easier to add my building footprints. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to add a raster, a satellite image. So under my web, I've got this quick map services. If you don't have that, you can go to your plugins, manage and install plugins, quick map services, and install that plugin. From what I can remember is that you won't see all these options here. So then you can go to your settings, go to more services and get contributed back. Okay, so let's go back and I'm just going to add a Google satellite image. So now I've got my image for my map. But let's say for some reason I don't want to show the image everywhere. I only want to look at my building, my rooftops for my buildings. So you don't have to go and clip the raster for the building footprints or something crazy like that. The only thing that you need to know is some blending modes. So I'm going to place my satellite image at the top. So with blending modes, what you will need to understand is that the layer at the top gets influenced by all the layers that's below it if you choose a blending mode for that. So luckily with rasters you also have your blending modes here. As you can see at this stage it's normal. But some of the easier blending modes to understand is by it blends by whether the layers below it is dark or light. So I actually want to show only my building footprints, so I'm going to choose the color black. Sorry that for my explanations about these blending modes, so I'm not quite exactly sure how to explain all of it, but I think it's best to just show you. So if I go to my stroke color and I change that also to black, and if I click on my satellite now, and instead of the blending mode normal, I can choose lighten. Boom, there you have your satellite image only for your rooftops. Look at that. Okay, so to further explain blending modes, let's say I want my building footprints to have a shadow now. So normally you would go to your layer, layer rendering, draw effect, click on a shadow and drop shadow. But hopefully you can see already what the problem is. My shadow is dark as well. And whatever happens below this layer that I've chosen the blending mode for will have an influence on that layer. So even if I drop a shadow, that means that shadow won't show, but actually my satellite image will just grow with that shadow. So for instance, let's make it 20. And you can see that my satellite image just got more, but not my shadow. So then I started to think about this as a little puzzle, and I finally got to solve it. Maybe you would got there quicker, but let me show you what I've done. So I've duplicated this layer, and I've placed it on top of my satellite image, clicked on it, and this time, now I actually want my layer to change based on the colors below it. So the best way that I thought of doing that is actually to use the darken blending mode. So I changed this layer to a white, as well as my stroke color. And I'll go to my layer rendering and use a blending mode darken. And there I can see my image again based on whatever happens below it. But now, because this layer is above my satellite, I can actually give it a draw effect. So I go to my draw effect and drop shadow, and there you have your shadows. So if I increase it and make it a little darker, you can see your shadows for your buildings. Some things that I had played around with is only to put my layer at the top, and instead of showing and say, okay, I don't want a blending mode, but I don't want to show my source. Then I say, okay, well, the shadow is just takes over the image, so that's not going to work. I also played around with just placing the layer at the top and say, okay, I want to make the opacity less, but then I realized that my draw effects also the opacity had an effect on my draw effects, so that also didn't work. So yeah, the best way that I found was to use blending modes, and I changed it to a darken, and there you have it. Okay, so hopefully you understand how the blending modes work with darken and lighten. So maybe something that I can show you, so you don't have to follow along for this, but I just I just like this effect that I also want to show you. So let's say I'm just going to add a new layer as well. So I'm going to switch off this. I'm going to let me make this normal again. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new layer and temporary sketch layer and make this a polygon. Once again, you don't have to follow along now, I just want to show you this effect. So, okay, so I've got so let's draw a polygon. So let's say I've got an area of interest here, which I want to show. Right click on it, and exactly the same as my buildings previous, what I've shown previously, I'm going to make it dark. Satellite image above, duplicate this layer, place it at the top, make it white. And my satellite image, let's change that to the lighten. Yeah. So now you can show your area of interest, and I can also have a shadow for it. Layer rendering, do effects, drop shadow. Okay, and over here I also need my blending mode as darken. Why is it not showing? It should be darken. Sorry about that. Maybe I should have saved, I think. Okay, duplicate layer and above. Yeah, okay, there I see it. So I'm going to change it to white, and my stroke again to white, and hopefully I will darken, draw effect, drop shadow. Yeah, there I have it. Yeah, sorry about that, but yeah. Okay, so now let's say I want this to be a floating city. So now I've got my shadow. I'm going to just change this a lot, maybe 20, and maybe something like that. Yeah, so now it's floating above the ground. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to place that below this layer, because now I don't have any layers below it that has an influence on this layer, but I'm going to say normal. So now it's floating above my other satellite image. But as you can see over there, you can't really see that it's floating. So I'm just going to change this brightness a little bit so that it looks like it's floating in the air. But now also I don't want my shadows to be as dark, because you still be able to see some shadow, some details below your shadow. So I'm just going to click on my, remember this is the layer that had my shadow, and layer rendering, draw effect. But instead of the opacity to be 100, I'm going to change it a little bit. And there you have it. There you have like a shadow that's above your other satellite image, and it looks like a floating city. Once again, you can also have an afterglow, and with the draw order, move it below and have it a dark if you want that shadow to be a little bit dispersed and not as just dark and it stops abruptly. But yeah, you can play around with that just to show you what the blending modes can do. Okay, so sorry for this derailed. Yeah, I just like to show you these little puzzles that you can play around with, and yeah, it's just it will be exciting to see some of the maps that you can come up with. But anyway, so let's get back to our spotlight map. So I'm just going to remove that. So hopefully you understand now how dark and light, and hopefully you already can start to think of how the spotlight map is going to work. But yeah, let me show you. So I'm going to remove this. Okay. And I'm going to keep my satellite image, but I'm just going to reset it. Below. Doesn't really matter. And my points of interest. So if you've been wondering what this layer has been doing here all the time, so this is just your OpenStreetMap points of interest. So if you have points of interest, there's with points layers in QGIS, there's a bunch of styles that you can apply. One of the styles is a heat map. And already the first colors that I've chosen here is a color ramp of dark and white. So hopefully you're already starting to see where this is going. Okay, but now the heated places are dark and other places is light. I actually want it the other way around because I want it to be a spotlight. So I'm going to switch it around, invert color. Alright, so there you have your spotlight. So let's start off with our Google satellite. So as you can remember that wherever things are light, you can show your satellite image. But so now use darken. But now you can see that, okay, it doesn't look that great. You can play around with your colors and things like that, but yeah, I haven't gotten it to work as great as actually choosing your blending mode as an overlay. So already you can see there that your image looks a lot clearer. But if you look over here and here, you can see that your areas that is white, it's overexposed. So then I thought, okay, if I go back to my points of interest heat map, so obviously the white is where it's really overexposed. So I want something between the black and the white. So if you click on your color ramp, I'm just going to click here somewhere in the middle. So I just drag that to the side, and once I say okay, and you can say okay, so my areas isn't that overexposed anymore. But I still want these areas to be a little bit more clearer. So what I've done is to click here again and just drag it, and yeah, you can play around with it. But yeah, let's just see how that looks. Already you can see that these areas are clearer without being overexposed. Okay, so now, and you can also play around with your radius. See, But I actually liked it at 10 because it gives you that little bit more of a spotlight effect. But yeah, play around with it and see what you can come up with. So now let's get back to our base map. So I'm clicking on my base map and I've got all these bunch of layers. So for each one, as you can remember, I've chosen the blending mode as overlay. So for each one, I'm just going to click on it, go to the layer rendering, and choose overlay. Street center line, layer, overlay, rivers, overlay, and my water overlay. Okay, and there you can see that here you've got your layers, and wherever it's light, it's showing, and where it's dark, it doesn't. But as you can see, there's some spots there. Why is that? So now this is where it gets a little bit confusing. If you use your blending modes, remember that every layer at the top, or your layer at the top, gets influenced by every layer below. So normally when you have your blending mode that you only want to depend on one, your layers should actually be switched around. So I'm going to place my satellite image at the top, and then I'm going to switch these ones around as well. And now I can see that my buildings now is once again there at, above my streets. And once again, you can play around with the drawing orders and so. But here you've got your basic spotlight map. But now I don't want my dark areas to be as dark. I still actually want to see a little bit what's going on in there. So I'm just going back to my points of interest. Click here, and instead of having it pitch black, I'm going to make it, let's start with 5%. Yeah, that actually looks good. So there you have your spotlight, and then the other areas you can still see a little bit what's going on, but you still highlight your areas of interest with your spotlight. Yeah, okay, so I think that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed it, and like I say, hopefully you can think of other scenarios of how to use this, and please share your ideas and your maps. Thank you very much.